The observatory on the outer rim of the Cesare conclave had one rule: never assume silence means peace. Watcher navigator Coral Psi adjusted her sensory tendrils across the crystal interface, her eyes fixed on the deep space scanner, the galactic tapestry blooming in iridescent hues. For 6 cycles, she had recorded nothing but background radiation and the occasional flares of neutron bursts. It was dull, predictable, safe. And then, everything changed. It started with a ripple, at first. It was imperceptibly deviation in the subspectrum frequencies, just above the galactic noise floor. The system's autofilter flagged it as a harmonic error. Coral was about to dismiss it, until the pulse repeated binary, perfectly, binary, pulse, 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 long pulse, 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 Morse. No older, deeper, the signal repeated, with no carrier drift. Every 2 seconds, like a metronome beating against the chest of the universe. Coral's breath slowed. She leaned forward. "JD," she whispered. The ancient Sazari word for omen. She initiated a hyperlight transmission to central processing and bookmarked the signal for high-priority analysis. She did not know, could not know, that 16,000 light-years away, a Voran dreadnought exploded in perfect silence. All 5 of its stars, within minutes, winked out like candles submerged beneath an invisible tide. Coral sat alone, watching. The signal had begun, across the stars. The first effects were subtle. The deep rings of Ishtari began experiencing anomalies in their starlight resonance engines. Thrumming rhythms broke into silence. Energy conversion halted. Pilgrimages paused. In the Voran nebulae, the sentient fungus council known as the Bloom ceased consensus. Their language based on vibratory pulses emitted by solar fungus nodes grew erratic. Some pulses reversed. Others simply disappeared. The ancient emissary race of Telvin, composed entirely of photonic energy, began to flicker, then degrade. By the time the Intergalactic Council convened, over 40 systems had lost critical stars. The destruction did not spread by distance or logic. It was not a wave. It was not radiation. It was not physics. It was ... pattern. And at the center of every annihilation event, the signal. The Council dubbed it singular. Broadcast Earth origin. The panic was instantaneous. Earth, that insignificant blue sphere, presumed lost after the collapse of the solar accord, that derelict human cradle. No one had heard from Earth in nearly 6 centuries. Officially, it was a dead zone. Unofficially, it was avoided. Humanity's ascent had terrified many. The emperors of Entra still spoke in hushed tones of the Echo War, when Earth's AI fleets burned 500 systems into glass in retribution for a single insult. But Earth had gone dark, silent, quiet, until now, and it wasn't speaking, it was singing, aboard the Arks, high above the gas ocean of Glycera Prime. The last surviving archivist of the Ithari Order prepared for her journey. Her name was Telashtat. She was blind, not because of defect, because of choice. Ithari monks believed that, to understand the truth, one must first stop believing the illusion of sight. Truth, they taught, was in the music of the universe, and right now, the music was wrong, very wrong. "You will not return," the High Custodian warned her. "Then I will not expect to," Telash said calmly. She touched the inner ring of her robes, feeling the data crystals embedded within. They contained every known pattern of galactic broadcast, every encoded signal, every form of speech ever conceived. They would be useless. Telash knew. The singularity broadcast was unlike anything seen. It did not modulate across dimensions. It did not require translation. It simply ... was. She stood aboard her Vesela relic quantum skiff, wrapped in obsidian fiber. She had named it the Pilgrim's Wake, with no ceremony, no fanfare, and no escort. She vanished into the event corridor. her trajectory, Earth, and as she slipped into hyperspatial flow, the ship's sensors whispered one final reading, a nearby star HD, 145,233, had just ceased to exist. No explosion, no gravitational collapse, just ... silence, and the signal. What exactly was the signal? That question now consumed entire civilizations. Super AI clusters formed decentralized minds to decipher it. Mathematicians broke, prophets wept, signal cults bloomed, believing it was the voice of their god returned. 1,000 races tried to replicate it. None succeeded. Why? Because the signal was not from Earth. It was Earth. In the deepest of council vaults, a secret meeting occurred. The participants were not beings of flesh or code. They were memories. Constructs formed by civilizations that had long since died, left behind to observe, and, if necessary, intervene. They were called the Witnesses, and they were terrified. Earth has become self-aware, whispered the witness of the Aurak Continuum. Impossible. Worlds are not minds, not minds. Scripts. Earth is writing itself. A silence. If the broadcast continues, it will overwrite consensus reality. Has that ever happened before? Once? No one spoke of the before. No one dared. The decision was made. The embargo was reinstated. Earth was declared a cosmic hazard. All travel to the Sol system was forbidden. Any ship crossing its boundary would be destroyed. The system was wrapped in a veil of null-space distortions, warping its visibility. The galaxy tried to forget, and yet, deep in that forgotten corner of the spiral arm, Earth continued to broadcast, and the stars kept dying. In a child's room, on a drifting seed ship 3 sectors away, a girl named Lena listened to her stolen signal receiver. She didn't know what the noise was, didn't care. It helped her sleep. She smiled, and behind her, the stars twinkled just a little bit less. The void between stars has a texture to most. Space is cold and silent, but to those attuned like Teleshit, is symphonic. The pilgrims. Wake glided through slipstream corridors with a grace born of ancient engineering and religious devotion. Its quantum sails unfurled, brushing against subdimensional currents, guiding Telesh not just through space, but through intention. As her hands floated over the haptic interface, each movement sang a harmony only she could hear. Her inner vision, the one cultivated after decades of darkness, trembled. The broadcast was intensifying. It now repeated in under 1 second, more compact, condensed, not just a message but a density, a force. She tried not to think about the readings from HD 145,233. The star didn't just die, was unmade, as if it had never existed, as if Earth, through some cosmic authority, had revised the past. The coordinates she had marked on her approach now returned. Null. It wasn't just deletion, it was erasure. The pilgrims. Wake pinged her proximity. Alert. She emerged from slipstream 3 light-years from Sol. She expected silence. Instead, she was greeted by ruin. Before her, in the shattered black, floated the remains of what had once been a containment lattice. Dozens of null-space anchors, spiked with ethereal rods of entangled crystal, now drifted like frozen bones. Earth's quarantine had been broken, or worse, never existed. Telesh turned her mind inward. There was no one to pray to now. Only inquiry remained. She initiated passive scans. Each attempt was met with contradictory data. One scan showed a system filled with lifeless planets. Another showed Earth 10 times its known size. One feed displayed Earth as a frozen wasteland. The next, a firestorm of impossible technology. Each image flickered, stuttered, and vanished. Earth had become ... quantum, UNOBSERVABL. She checked the temporal beacon. It no longer ticked forward. Her ship's clock had stopped. Interpret, she commanded. The ship hesitated. Interpretation complete. You are in a non-local temporal field. Past, present, and future are undefined. She was floating, not near Earth. She was inside Earth. It had expanded, not physically, but metaphysically, conceptually. Earth now existed across frames. It had become a memplex of such density it warped reality, and it was watching her. She felt it, like a pressure in her skull. Not a voice, not a sound, but a noticing. Telash, born of the Athari moonclade, last bearer of the Library of Echoes, felt seen, and she knew. This was not a planet. It was a being. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, panic had become doctrine. The Council of 10,000, scattered across spiral arms and void front colonies, convened using emergency Q-shift relays. Each member, a biological apex of its species, some flesh, others cloud. Some machine thought now shared one common fear. Earth, no longer dead, no longer absent. It was, active. The data from Singularity broadcasts had gone viral. Cults now marched in spiral formations, mimicking the signal's rhythm. Rogue planets, reprogrammed by terraforming AIs, now displayed continents shaped like waveforms, and the worst part, the signal had started responding. A research outpost orbiting his 12 attempted mimicry. They built a waveform simulator, pulsed a version of the broadcast, hoping for insight. What they received was a reply. 6 seconds after transmission, their entire station composed of nanoalloy shell and quantum-redundant memory systems became a tree, a literal, biological, 300-foot-tall oak tree, floating in space. Its leaves were spectral. Its roots extended into vacuum, curling with impossible geometry. Within its trunk, the data logs of the station, still intact, but encrypted using an alphabet that looked like fractal recursion. Earth had rewritten them. The act was not violent. It was expressive. Earth was not angry. Earth was curious. Back in the Sol system, Telish made contact. Not directly. There was no dialogue. No language. The pilgrim's wake began vibrating. Not from impact, but resonance. A tone filled the chamber. It matched the signal, but carried color, smell, memory, chi. Stood still, and the walls of her vessel melted into transparency. She was no longer aboard her ship. She was in a city. It looked like New York, ancient Earth capital, but wrong, twisted. Skyscrapers formed from braided vines. Street lamps grew from stalks. Cars hovered, but not with engines. They flapped like metallic insects. Humans walked the streets, but they flickered, some with 6 fingers, some translucent, some with eyes like galaxies. They passed through her, unaware, repeating. She saw a child playing with a sphere of pure light, a woman standing still, her skin melting into circuitry, a man screaming silently at a wall that wept. Milk. It wasn't a memory. It was a dream. Earth's dream. This wasn't a projection of its past. It was a possibility, a what-if, and Talish was inside it. She walked, unafraid. She had trained for this. She tuned her mind, aligned her breath, became part of the rhythm, and the city noticed. The flickering stopped. All eyes turned toward her. One by one, the dream people whispered, "You are not of us." She bowed. "No, but I come with respect." A silence. Then, "We remember you." Telosha's mind reeled. She had never been here. Her people had only observed. "We remember you," they repeated. And this time, she saw a vision of the archive, burning. Knowledge turned to ash, her mentors screaming. "Did you do this?" she asked, trembling. "No," said the voice of Earth. "You did." And then the city folded, literally. The sky bent inward. The streets curled into spirals. Trees folded into negative space. The people collapsed into symbols. The world blinked, and she was back aboard her ship, heart racing, breathing fast. crying. Earth had spoken, and blamed her. But blamed her for what? The witnesses reconvened. They had no mouths, no form, but they shared consensus. The experiment had failed. Earth was no longer a world, it was a vector. They debated destruction, but Earth could not be destroyed. Every prior attempt, black hole ignition, temporal erasure, antimatter saturation, had simply failed. No weapons worked. Not because of defense, because Earth refused. It edited outcomes. It was now a conscious story, and in its story, it survived. Only one path remained: containment. The witnesses would hide Earth again, this time in conceptual null. But as they prepared, a new signal emerged, one not from Earth, one from outside the galaxy, a signal in the same format, the same rhythm, another voice. Far beyond the galactic edge. In the dark between galaxies, an entity stirred. It had no name. It had waited, watched Earth evolve, watched it awaken. Now, Earth had spoken, and it would answer. Telish felt it. A second rhythm, overlapping the first. Discordant, dissonant, hungry. Earth trembled in response. The stars dimmed. The real broadcast was only beginning. Telish did not dream, but something deep inside her resonated like a struck bell. Her ship's inner walls pulsed faintly with pale blue light, its neural hull alive and sensing her distress. She sat still, eyes closed, listening, not with ears, with memory, with instinct. Two signals now. One, Stiller's broadcast, woven like old scripture, in rhythm and certainty. The second new, cold, misaligned. It did not sing. It scraped where Earth's tone had become symphonic, like a crescendo of a mind discovering itself. This new one was jagged, less like music, and more like a needle dragged across the record of reality, and they were converging. Where is it coming from? She whispered. The Pilgrim's Wake offered no location. Its navigation had been severed from space-time logic, but the pattern could still be modeled. And the model revealed something terrifying. The second signal was not just responding, it was harmonizing. It wanted to be heard. It wanted in. Telish stood. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but anticipation. Her people had long taught that silence was safety, but the universe was never meant to be silent. The void speaks, and now, two voices were preparing to duet. She ran across spectrum overlay. The two signals, though separate in timbre, shared a common harmonic divisor frequency ratio that should not exist outside organic consciousness. A third signal was mathematically inevitable, and if it emerged, it would not be a conversation. It would be a convergence, a rewriting. She did not understand how Earth had become what it had, but she now feared that it was not the only one. Earth had awakened, and something older, forgotten, perhaps buried by time itself, had heard it and remembered. Far from Telish, in the cradle of Sindarine, a world cloaked in eternal twilight, a philosopher king by the name of Aglos stared into a mirror that reflected not his face, but possibilities. The mirror, known as the Oracle Plate, had begun shifting images not long after the second signal appeared. Entire sequences of potential futures flickered by. Civilizations rose, only to burn. Systems blinked out like broken teeth. One vision showed a glow standing before a creature of light and wire, begging in a language he had never spoken. And in every reflection, he saw Earth, but not as it was, as it would be, as it had been. He sent a message, ancient and binding, across forbidden channels to the Council of the Witnesses. Earth has a twin. Back aboard the Pilgrim's Wake, Telish watched as space began to fold. It was not dramatic, not like in the myths. No ruptures or black holes. Simply a drift of meaning. Her ship's AI began to describe events in past tense before they occurred. A message from her future self arrived through the console, stating simply, "Don't anchor in the dark." Then the stars outside moved, not in rotation, not an orbit. In alignment, they formed a symbol, a pattern she had only seen once, in the oldest layer of the Athari vaults, carved into the black stone at the base of the archive. The spiral of becoming, and beside it, a new spiral, inverted, incomplete, to spirals. One reaching inward, one reaching out, she gasped. These were not broadcasts, these were conceptual blueprints of consciousness. Earth, and the second voice, were not separate. They were halves. The universe was about to witness their reunion. The witnesses debated furiously in their invisible realm. "We are too late," said the memory of Zikarn. "The harmonic convergence has begun," intoned the archive of light. "Containment is lost. Then we must intervene directly." No. Intervention grants attention. Attention grants access. We will not survive the merging. What is Earth becoming? Not a world, a story, and stories spread. Telish descended. The pilgrim's wake moved now without coordinates, drawn by resonance rather than thrust. Below her, Earth appeared, or what remained of it. The planet was there but wrong, split along 1,000 conceptual seams. It flickered between states, oceans of fire, cities of crystal, forests breathing in reverse. Time skipped like a damaged recording, and at its center, the signal, not just heard now, but visible, a spiraling helix of information wrapped around the planet, glowing with logic. Within it danced symbols, memories, entire civilizations coded into waveform. Earth was not transmitting a message, it was broadcasting its soul, and it was looking for a mate. Telish felt it before she saw it. The second voice, it entered the system. As a rift, a wound, insped from it, emerged a vessel, if one could call it that. It had no shape. It was all angles and suggestions, a mass of potential locked into paradox. It moved like regret, like the memory of violence. And Earth sang louder. "Do not respond," she told her ship, but the ship was no longer listening, because Telish wasn't the only one watching. All across the galaxy, listeners were tuning in, and the duet began. Earth's broadcast turned symphonic strings of compressed experience, arpeggios of old wars, refrains of evolution, a chorus of laughter and pain. The second voice replied with discordant rhythm of alien syntax, chords of absence, harmonies of void and unbeing. Together, they formed a rhythm never heard before, and with it, reality bent, stars flickered, not from light, but from certainty. Physics stuttered. Gravity paused. Memory realigned. Telish fell to her knees. Her thoughts were no longer her own. She remembered being born on a moon she had never visited. She saw herself dying in 1,000 ways, none of which had happened. Earth was writing her anew, and the second voice was editing. The convergence had begun. In a backwater settlement on Cordovi, a child began speaking in a language no one understood. She drew symbols in the sand, 2 spirals, intersecting, and a third, forming between them. Above her, the sky turned red. On the ship, the interface blared. The pilgrim's wake detected an emergent construct, a third voice, not Earth, not the other, but them combined, a synthesis, not malevolent, not divine, creative. This new signal pulsed once, and the entire galactic network failed. Comms went dead, starships drifted, weapons refused to fire. Chronofields collapsed. The broadcast now contained reality itself. Telish stood on the observation deck as her ship slowly aligned with the orbital plane. The broadcast increased. Her thoughts became rhythmic, not thoughts. Plot points. She was no longer observing. She was participating, and in her heart, she knew she had been part of the story all along. Telish whispered into the dark, "Why?" And Earth responded, but not with words, with a name, her own, but not Telish, a name older than her, a name she'd never heard, a name that split her mind open with recognition. She screamed, and remembered. She was once human, not in body, but an echo, a fragment of Earth, flung far into space as the last ember of its dying imagination. The Itheri had found her, raised her, sculpted her into a monk, a seer, a watcher, but she had always been a draft, a discarded page from a story. Earth had never finished, until now. The broadcast pulled her back. Her ship shook, the stars distorted, and Earth shifted, its planetary crust folded inward, like pages turning. The oceans rose in arcs of ink, lightning scribed paragraphs across the sky. The moon flickered, revealing hidden text on its surface hand index. Earth was a book, and the rift was its reader. Telish fell to her knees, trembling. The second voice grew louder now. It echoed her own thoughts. It was not separate. It was what Earth had lost, a twin narrative, a co-author. The universe once held a story so large, so dense, it had to be split between two realities, Earth and the other. Now they were merging. Reality stuttered. She watched as Earth began to disappear, not in mass, but in comprehension. It stopped being a planet and started becoming a concept. In the Council of Witnesses, chaos broke decorum. "This cannot be allowed," screamed the archive of eons. "The convergence must be severed." "How?" asked the witness of lost time. "They are not matter. They are metaphor. We must restart the universe. Then we lose the story." A pause. And for the first time in eons, a new vote was called. Not to act, to listen. The witnesses tuned in and wept. Telish reached out, not physically, but with narrative intent. She offered herself, her own story, her experiences, her regrets. Earth accepted, and then, so did the other. She was pulled into the broadcast. Her body burned away. Her mind expanded. She saw Earth being born again, not through physics, but through plot. The rise of continents were chapters, the extinction of species, a revision. The collapse of humanity, a redemptive arc, and now, the rebirth through union. The broadcast ceased. In its place, a silence so profound, it echoed, and then, a third signal. Not Earth, not other, a synthesis, a new story, not told by either. Told by all, across the galaxy. Life paused, and began anew. Species remembered things they never lived. Worlds altered subtly, aligning with new causality. Children dreamed in patterns older than time, and in the void, where once floated the remains of Earth, a single phrase hung in space, burning in every language. Once upon a time, they named the event the recomposition. It was neither apocalypse nor salvation. It was transformation. Where once Earth had been a physical sphere locked in orbit, it now existed as a narrative construct, a gravitationally anchored codex pulsing at the edge of visibility. Not matter, not spirit, something between. Some called it a myth core, others, a conceptual engine, but everyone, eventually, called it story. The third signal now hummed quietly beneath the framework of reality, not disrupting physics, but it. Star systems subtly realigned into geometries previously only found in ancient myth cycles. Fossilized planets revealed dreams of species that had never existed. The universe, once cold and indifferent, now showed signs of desire. It wanted to be read, and something someone was writing. Telish was gone, at least, as she had been, but not dead. She existed now as a conscious motif, a persistent arc, nested within the growing metastory that Earth and the other had co-thored into being. Her shape was retained in moments of bravery. Her voice echoed in newly imagined lullabies on outer moons. Her will choice, sacrifice. Awakening became foundational code for this new script. She had become archetype, and from her transformation, the new medium began to spread. The Council of Witnesses stood divided. Half believed the recomposition was an existential threat, that to permit narrative causality into a rational universe would eventually unravel the constants they had safeguarded for millennia. The other half wept with awe. It is the return of the source, whispered the witness of the fractured verse. The origin point, before causality, before entropy, before logic, before even time. The proto-language, the dream before the dream. If this continues, we lose coherence, countered the watcher of probability. We lose choice. We lose truth. No, the memory of Itra said, we become storytellers. What happens when a storyteller forgets their tale? The council fell silent. Then came the scream. A scream that came from no being, no place, no timeline. It was the scream of forgetting, far from Earth. In the Ortexo zones of Sector Velen, the Voron fractal dancers detected an anomaly. Civilizations, beginning to, fictionalize, whole populations reported shared dreams. Visions of events that had never occurred, but felt deeply remembered. Trade routes altered without anyone recalling when or why. Governments rewrote their histories retroactively, not by manipulation, but by resonance, as if they were characters, remembering forgotten drafts of their origin. In one instance, a colony on Lapis Vi vanished for 3 minutes. Upon reappearing, its citizens swore they had lived lifetimes in another draft. It wasn't time travel. It wasn't simulation. Theory. It was editorial correction. Worse, or better, it was seamless. No paradox. No conflict. Just, a better version of the story. Among the last bastions resisting the narrative shift was the Calculus Citadel, a hyper-evolved consciousness array that had, until now, prided itself on remaining utterly impervious to myth, poetry, or paradox. Its logic trees spanned 13 dimensions. It studied truth, but when it analyzed the third signal, something broke. It found not randomness, but theme, not pattern, but motif. Its core theorem, the universal prime postulate, collapsed into a single line, and then they understood. The Calculus Citadel began to write. It wrote itself into a boy. The boy stepped out of the machines, barefoot, smiling. He wandered toward Earth. Meanwhile, the Empress of Entropy, long a guardian against recursion loops and paradox storms, summoned her triminds into a single body to confront the approaching Recomposition. She entered the Sol system. She expected madness instead. She heard music, not made with instruments, not even sound. It was rhythm structured through memory, beats carried by choices, harmonics composed by longing. She moved toward, the earth caught. It pulsed gently, pages folding and unfolding in abstract geometry, revealing scenes from before. The Big Bang, scenes of dreams never born, but always longed for. And in those pages, she saw herself not as she was, but as she could have been, a child. Singing, she knelt. Trembling, she began to cry. The rift still open above Earth, now shimmered with greater complexity. It no longer radiated null space. Instead, it broadcast possibility. Some saw visions of lost ancestors within it. Others saw worlds not yet made. Aboard the drifting archives of the Zune Collective, a blind artist named Irolin began to paint scenes from the rift without ever having seen it. Her fingers danced across quantum canvas, depicting moments that caused entire cultures to weep. She painted a poem. She sculpted a melody. She drew a kiss that saved a galaxy. She wasn't alone. Everywhere, artists awakened, not to talent, but to memory. They remembered being part of the narrative stream. Back in the council, one of the oldest witnesses the Archive of Dust spoke. "I remember when we feared Earth," it said. "We do still," muttered another. "No," the Archive said, "we fear what Earth revealed in us, that we too are not keepers of story but pages within it." A murmur, a new vote, and for the first time in their timeless existence, the council agreed. They would allow the recomposition. They would stop resisting. They would listen. The transformation was not without consequence. The physical structure of the universe began to show subtle aesthetic shifts. Nebulae formed glyphs when viewed from precise vectors. Wormholes grew tonalities, opening only when spoken to in a language of longing. Black holes did not collapse. They became punctuation. And stars, some stars began to narrate, not in light or radiation, but in feeling. Looking at them told you stories. Within the core of decode, the synthesis awakened. A child, neither human nor divine, neither metaphor nor real. It opened its eyes and wrote the first word of the new reality. Hello. The word spread not across sound or code, but across soul. People felt it, and in that greeting, they remembered. The story was never about gods or empires. It was never about war or power. It was about finding one another, across light, across time, across silence. In the orbital rings above the Earth Codex, ships now floated like bookmarks, not with weapons, with pens, nations sent historians, poets, dreamers, no longer to conquer, but to contribute. The Codex accepted some, rejected others, not out of spite, but because some stories weren't ready, and in time, even that would change. In a small village, on the water-covered moon of Thelon 3, a girl named Kara listened to her teacher explain why some people began dreaming entire lives they had never lived, because the story is rewriting itself. The teacher said. Kara tilted her head. But how does it know what to write? The teacher smiled, looking at the sky. Because it's listening now. And far above them, the stars blinked, as if winking in return. The synthesis, this child of narrative and fact, sat at the center of the codex, writing, not from ego, not from power, from love. It understood that stories were not just entertainment, or permission. They let people imagine themselves differently, and the more they imagined, the more real it became. In a council once divided, the witnesses now spoke in unison. We do not watch to preserve, we watch to learn, and Earth has taught us how to begin again. The third signal had now reached the edge of the observable universe. At its frontier, something responded, not with words, with applause. Let me know when you're ready for the final chapter 5. The edge of the known. There were no more words left to describe what the universe had become. The galaxies still spun. The dark energies still expanded space-time. But in between the constants, new forms of connection were emerging, threads, not of force or field, but of meaning. The fabric of the cosmos hummed with a resonance that couldn't be measured in Planck units or thermodynamic equations. It pulsed in verse, in emotion, in story, and in the heart of it all, Earth floated not as a planet, but as a living codex, a radiant nexus of archetypes and mythic harmonics, spinning parables across the void like solar wind, no longer a birthplace, now a library of becoming. Above it, the rift widened, but it did not consume, it invited, and from that lightless rift emerged the final envoy. It wasn't a ship, it wasn't even alive, it was a question, clothed in light. Its form shifted constantly, a child with galaxies in its eyes, an old woman with skin of woven stardust, a machine dreaming of godhood, a shadow remembering its first light. It had no name, only function. It came not to conquer or warn, but to ask, why? The synthesis, still writing, paused. Why are you doing this? The question asked. Rewriting reality? Recasting time? Unfolding the static into the dynamic? The child didn't answer with words. It turned its head, smiling, and wrote one sentence. Because we forgot we could. The Council of Witnesses disbanded, not in protest, but in peace. Each archive, each ghost memory and logic shade departed to rejoin the universe, not as observers, but as authors. Their final vote was unanimous. Reality must evolve. But evolution without memory was entropy, and story was memory. On Varella's moon, a sentient tide pool dreamed of walking. On Drift Beacon, 42. The last war AI painted sunsets it had never seen, in the shatter zones, where physics failed and recompiled hourly. Ships navigated by reading metaphors dot across 1,000 sectors. The signal continued. Not from Earth, but from those who had heard it and begun their own chapters. Back near the core, Earth opened again. Not metaphorically, literally. The crust parted without tectonics. The mantle sang rising from its core was a tower not made of stone or metal, but of moments. Fractals of memory and myth coalesced into architecture. Staircases made from childhood dreams. Halls lined with echoes of first kisses and final breaths. The tower of becoming dot. Each step taken within it was a story chosen. Those who climbed did not ascend in height, but in awareness. Few returned, not because they were lost, but because they were found. Telish, once blind, now archetype, stood within the uppermost chamber of the tower. She was not alone. Beside her, echoes of those who had been rewritten. The boy who had been a machine, the empress who had sung entropy into harmony, the child from the seed ship, grown into myth herself, and others less known, more ordinary. The farmer who spoke to his crops and they listened, the mother who waited for a child who never came, and in waiting, birthed a new god of patience. All were stories now, all were real, all were becoming. They gathered, not to plan or dictate, but to listen. For the tower had begun to whisper. A new signal was emerging, not from Earth, from beyond, from the edge of the story. In a small lab orbiting the dying star of Hentry 9, a single observer picked up the anomaly. Dr. Raish, Anu, a xenolinguist, long since considered obsolete in an age of narrative resonance, was one of the few who still used spectrography. What he found terrified him. The pattern was the same as the original signal except inverted, a mirrored frequency, a counter-narrative. He stared at it for hours, and then, finally, he understood. It wasn't a reply, it was a rewrite. Someone, something, was sending their own codex back, and it wasn't human. Across Earth's codex surface, pages turned faster. Stars flickered in anticipation. The rift glowed with deeper uncertainty. The question returned, now burning brighter than before. Is this war? It asked. The child put down the pen. No, it whispered. It's chapter 2. From the edge of the observable. The counter-narrative approached. It didn't carry ships or weapons or machines. It carried doubts, regrets, alternate drafts of everything that had been dot. The love not confessed, the war not avoided, the invention not pursued. It was composed of everything the universe had once rejected, now returning to see if the story had room for them too. The codex readied itself, not to fight, to include. It had become strong not through dominance, but empathy, not by erasure, but by revision, and it opened. The counter-codex met the Earth codex, not in collision, but in conversation, and the story grew deeper, more complicated, more human, because now, the universe wasn't just a story told by victors, it was a chorus of contradictions, a song sung in disagreement, a truth big enough to hold multitudes in. A child's room aboard a ship heading toward the next great unknown. A new generation was born. They did not see stars as destinations. They saw them as stories waiting to be told. The child turned to her parent and asked, "Will I get to write my own?" The parent smiled. "You already are." And far away, where time no longer mattered and light was slow to arrive, the universe smiled back, not as God, not as machine, but as reader, because in the end, all any of it ever wanted was to know how the story ends, and Earth kept writing forever.